I'd love to actually talking about that. I know you mentioned that sort of evaluation process, and Andrew bringing you into the conversation. I guess technical due diligence is a big part of that, and sort of how you work with companies in a sort of a technology sense, and how you support with that. Could you tell me a little bit more about the importance of that tech aspect when you're working with companies at Frog, and what are the kinds of things you do there?
Yeah, of course. Clearly, we invest in technology businesses, through the scale up phase, and as you ask, in the due diligence phase, one thing to really tease out and understand is how the platform is, its steady state today, and the journey that the founders and the development team have been on to get to where they are, because it is often too easy, too simple to assume that being able to scale a technology business is achieved just through the intrinsic elasticity of the services offered, and often we see companies that where a platform's been built for 50, 60, 70 clients or customers, it's still being supported for 250, 300 customers, and the growth trajectory is looking into the thousands. So there's technology issues there which we evaluate and look for a plan to migrate from that startup environment through to what we would expect to see through scale up. But also organizationally, it's very important, because where I've seen organizations that are supporting far many more clients outwardly quite successfully than have been designed for, when you peel back the layers, often you see there's just a tremendous amount of what we would expect to call DevOps time is actually developers maintaining the platform, rebooting servers, patching code, and so on, just to sustain the acceleration in the client base. So there's a number of different areas that we look at, but principally we look at how does the technology go in its current state through scale, what changes are going, where are the ceilings, and what changes need to be made in order for that to continue. But also organizationally, how are the developers, how are the engineers configured, and how does the organization look, so that the behaviors can change, the practices can change, and we'll work through process development to get to that next stage in the life cycle.
Yeah, and I think that's something which is always really surprising to me when, we obviously have conversations with companies around their technologies, and I have colleagues who sort of support them with sort of the re-architecture work in some cases, or migrations. But the amount of tech you can actually have in just even a scale up, this might be a company which is just 2 years old, and yet, like you said, has been built for a certain purpose, which maybe as it goes into that scale up stage, we find that, actually it's creaking and it doesn't quite fit for purpose there.
Completely, and the market expectations change during that time as well. In the startup phase, you can have a client base that is very, very tolerant and more forgiving on time, but it changes very, very quickly and in fact abruptly during that scale-up phase. And so organizations also need to recognize that the time is no longer on their side, for example.
Yeah. And perhaps if we go on to, we've talked a little bit about the business side of things, but the technology side of things, but maybe if we touch on then the sort of business growth and acceleration side of things. And this is obviously something which is really sort of at the heart of, I guess, where Microsoft for Startups steps in. And I think, very much at the heart of obviously where Frog steps in as well. But, how do we help companies to really take that big leap into a growth stage business where they're pulling in more clients, where they're getting into a cadence, they have a rhythm, they have a pattern of operation, which they can then sort of scale and grow with. And I guess for both of you, maybe if I sort of go to both of you on this one, thinking about the technology as well as the business side of things, how important is it that a company demonstrates that growth and acceleration, and how do you, I guess, maybe help them with that part as far as, keeping them honest with it, helping them to figure out what kind of acceleration they should be looking at, those types of things. And I wonder, maybe we go back to James to sort of, think about that business side of things to kick off with.
Yeah, well, it's again, it's not a one-size-fits-all answer, because different businesses will have evolved in different ways. I mean, something as simple as having a sales-led entrepreneur in the CEO position will make a massive difference to perhaps a technical entrepreneur. I mean, it's kind of obvious, but it's worth saying. And I see that quite a lot. So, when Andrew and I get deployed to do our respective pieces of due diligence, honestly, Amali, within 30 minutes, you know from the questions that you've asked, I'm sure it's the same with Andrew, what you're going to see in terms of how rudimentary or how sophisticated that particular commercial setup will be. But as I said, that usually starts with leadership. So if there is an experienced sales leader, or commercial leader, let's say, because I think it's not enough just to be sales anymore, that the marketing element is absolutely critical. But if there is somebody in place, and they've been in place for a decent period of time, let's say more than a year, then you're likely to see some sort of scaffolding around the commercial function. You're likely to see, obviously, there's been some hires, so there'll actually be people on the ground with performance management objectives and some sort of comp based around target achievement. There's likely to be some metrics, and that might be embedded within a CRM system, say something like Dynamics, and there might be a channel strategy where they've got a number of different partners who are hopefully enabled to varying degrees and are out there either referring or reselling their product. Now, if that's all in place, Amali, then I think my role is kind of optimizing and getting that extra 1%, if you like, and that can come down to something as simple as maybe it's the recommendation of really specific structured third-party sales training, or maybe it's that the commercial leader has got a leaning towards sales or marketing, and therefore you augment the other side. So it could be that, but if I just flip that coin that I've just described on the other side, also what we do sometimes see is we see what we think is a fabulous business with wonderful potential, but none of the things that I've just described. The sales operation or the commercial operation is nascent at best. And if I go back to perhaps what I talked about at the start of the call, was that the founding team have gone out and basically sold it to their black book. So that then is a much well, I wouldn't say it's more challenging, but it's a very different type of job for me. That's one where I'm going to get much more involved.
Yeah.
And potentially we could even get ourselves into a position, Amali, where we are introducing and perhaps even advising on the recruitment of that commercial leader.
And I think that point, James, around the needs being different, I think is so important, because we have a similar type of process. We do a deep dive with companies who we onboard to our programs, but it's almost that second part, which is the road mapping, right? To really then say, look, we've understood now what we think your needs are, or we've understood where you feel you are stronger or weaker, or where you need to develop further. But then what do we need to do? And I think creating that sort of bespoke journey for each of those companies to say, look, these are the things that we can put in place to help you to reach those targets. We know that these are key things which a company like yourself needs to achieve, and this will help you to achieve, X, Y, and Z. That's, I think, such a critical part of, helping those companies along as well. And I'd love to pull in Andrew at this point as well, because the technology side, I think, for me, is always really interesting. When people think about the technology development, they only think about the technology. Whereas, I think all of us know that the people, how do you grow a tech team? How do you support that sort of the growth of the team from a maturity standpoint, as much as the development and the maturation of the technology is so critical as well. So from the companies you see, when they're coming to you as this company who is, starting with their scaling journey, they might be, might have hired 3 times the number of staff that they would have had before into their tech teams. What are some of those common themes and challenges that you see with companies? Do you have any tips for companies going through that process?
Yeah, I mean, you just touched on it there. It's often twofold. It is with the technology, and it is with the people. And often we see companies know what their challenges are today, and they know the desired state. And often my advice is around the sequence of events and understanding there are stage gates and points of success that stand between where they are today and where they want to be. Often we hear and we see businesses and their project is taking this monolithic platform and re-architecting into for example, a microservices architecture. And in a business that is trading and being successful today, and so understanding what needs to be done in the short, the medium, and the long term, and then structuring an organization and organizational development and specific changes at specific times, that's often not particularly obvious, because there's the burden of aiming for the end state together with operating the business as it is today. And so we look at 2 things. We look at where's the tech stack, what needs to be done in the next 30 days, 90 days, 180 days. How do the people that we have today, how are they going to be deployed today, and how is the organisation going to behave and look differently in those next periods of time?
Yeah, and I love that point around remembering that these companies are building as they go along, which I think, I've heard an analogy. I think it was something like, it's like jumping out, being an entrepreneur is like jumping out of a plane and trying to build, I think it's the aircraft, whilst you're, flying through the air kind of thing. And I think whereas building something in a large established company, you have your teams in place, they are settled, they've worked on projects together before, and you're just doing the building. With a scale up, you're not only doing the building, you're creating the team who are doing the building as you do the building. So you've got all of these kind of, things which are changing, and trying to both settle that is such a critical part of making sure that you build the right technologies and that, you create high performing teams as well.